Hello, welcome to another In Conversation that the Queensland Centre for Domestic and Family Violence research occasionally do, and it's part of chatting to people that we can draw insights from and useful information. So here we are in Townsville actually, as part of our 14th, I believe it is, annual Indigenous Violence Prevention Forum. And I'm here with two delightful people. So I'm Heather Lovatt. I am the director of the Queensland Centre that I've just mentioned, and I will allow Jamie and Charlie to introduce themselves because they are the fonts of knowledge of which I will learn from, as we all will. So Jamie, can I turn to you?
Yes, so Jamie Anderson. I am a Gungaloo Kanaloo woman from the Dawson River area in central Queensland and come from the social work background and have spent many years working in this space for community and with community.
Gee, almost the same as me, Jamie, but of course I'm a man, so I'm a Gurindji man. I was born in Alice Springs and have lived in Darwin most of my life. My name's Charlie King. Gurindji, they call me Kiwa, but I go by Charlie King, and by the social work background as well. So I've worked in child protection for many years and working with family violence and the justice system, and then since 1994 I joined the ABC, so I've been a sports broadcaster since 1994, but not able to leave behind that work that I'd done earlier on. I still dabble in that space and have continued to do that for many years.
Well, we might begin by asking what event led you into working towards and striving towards eliminating domestic and family violence?
Yeah. Do you know, I don't know if there's ever one event, but one thing stands out in my mind when I was a child protection worker, and I remember it was late on a Saturday night. I was called to a child protection call-out, an investigation, and I saw a lady lying on the floor, and she's obviously in great pain, and she was very obvious to me, broken ribs, and she'd been hurt and hit by someone, and she was trying to breathe and finding it really hard to breathe, and she had a baby not far from her crying for her mother, and it just stays in my mind, you know, and that was that's 50 years ago, you know, and I still, sometimes when I work in this space and I get involved with people, the image comes back to me, and I never walked away saying I'm going to do a lot to stop that. Yes. But the image stays with me. And I'm sure that's the same for a lot of people who work in this space, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you. So right now we are experiencing something significant in having a yarn with yourself. So can you describe a significant moment or yarn in your time?
That relates to family
violence? Yeah. Significant.
Yeah, well, in 2006, I was asked by the Northern Territory Government to travel around the Northern Territory and talk to Indigenous men about pornography and whether they understood the classifications. Did they know R-rated, X-rated, and and so on. And so I agreed to do it, but I said I'd do it as long as I had the opportunity to talk to men about family violence and child protection. And I found it an incredible thing, and I visited, I think, 38 communities across the Northern Territory. I found an incredible thing that men had very little understanding of child protection, child abuse. They thought in a lot of cases that child abuse was when you swore at your children. Someone said you've got to cut out the child abuse, they'd make efforts to stop swearing at their children, but they didn't realise all the other things. So that was amazing too. But I found something else that caught my attention as well, that in any group of men, there was always a small group of men who felt strongly that we all should do something to stop the violence that was happening. Right. And there was another group of men, almost the same size in that community, who wish you'd all just go away and mind your business, it had nothing to do with you. And in the middle were all these other men who were unsure what they actually felt about it. So I thought if I could work with the ones who want to make change and help them build the others or encourage the others to join them, build the army if you like, maybe they could change the whole perception out on the community. So that was a big event for me, just finding that out, because I'd done work out in those communities since about 1970, you know, so I've done a lot of work there, but I never really looked at those two issues together.
Okay, how interesting.
Jamie, sometimes I wonder too, and Charlie, with your knowledge, you mentioned family violence and child protection, both strengths in the way you work. Often, you know, there's also a tension sometimes in the child protection work in being aware of violence, but also both holding the perpetrator accountable or keeping perpetrator visible, but also trying to change that behaviour in a way that is supportive and at the same time protecting the victim. Were there tensions in your work with child protection in that way, Charlie, and trying to work or people understanding family violence, do you think?
See, I remember in the years that I worked in child protection that the focus was on the safety of the child. That's why you went there.
Yeah.
And I'm almost embarrassed to say this today, or sad to say this today, that the issue of family violence, and I'm talking back in the 1970s, family violence was largely ignored. It did happen. We knew it happened. We didn't think for a moment that children shouldn't be witnessing that. That was never a reason for removing a child or anything like that. So our focus was always just on the safety of the child. Then you had to make a decision, is the child safe here? If the child's safe here, then we can work with his family and see what we can do with that. If the child's not safe, we'll remove the child. But we never ever then thought, we then still need to work with his family in order for them to get the child back. So they were quite separate back in the 70s. I mean, we know now, Heather, don't we? I mean, we all know that child protection and family violence, I mean, they sit together in many cases. Most cases.
Yes. No, thank you.
Charlie, you mentioned the 38 communities that you consulted with and met and had yarns with. So are you able to talk about that process which led to the No More campaign?
Yeah. Sure. And I think after about 18 of those communities, I went to the community of Yundamu, which are the Walbury people west of Alice Springs, out in the middle of nowhere. And I spoke to a small group of men. I think there were about 10 or 12 men, and about 8 or 9 of them were elders, older men. And so I told them about family violence. I said, you know, family violence is a big problem in Australia. Do you know? Is it a problem here at your community? And they didn't think that it was, or it was an acceptable behaviour, so therefore it wasn't seen as a problem. But then when I told them, I remember, and I can't remember what the stats were that I gave them, but it was something like, I said to them, do you know, in our country, in Australia, 500,000 women get sexually or physically abused every year. That's one every minute. If I talk to you for 10 minutes, by the time I finish, that's 10 more women that would be victims of family violence. And they looked at me, and an old guy by the name of Ned Hargraves looked at me, and his eyes went really sad, and he shook his fingers, as Aboriginal people often do, in front of my face like that, and he said, no more. Which in the Aboriginal way, no more means let's get rid of it. It's not like we've got enough, we don't need any more. If somebody passes away and you say, what happened to old Bill, they say, no more. So that was there. So I never claimed those words as my own.
Right.
I just heard them say that, and I thought to myself, that's a good comment. That's a strong statement to make. And so I told other men, I said, those old Walbury men, when we tell them about family violence, they say, no more. And then the Gringy men would say, when we said that to them, they'd say, well, we should all link up. And I thought, there's another powerful statement. Why can't we link up? Then I thought, how can we portray linking up? And then I thought, men in great numbers are involved with sport. Great numbers are involved with sport, and they go out on the field and they stand there and they often put their arm around each other's shoulders. So why don't we get them to link up at the elbows and make this symbolic statement that they're linked up with all the other men, and it was very strong. And what amazed me later on, I found out, I went to some other communities, they were already doing it. They'd already heard about that, and they were playing football matches, and they were doing that. They were going out there and linking up arms. And the only thing that was missing, of course, was the information to the people, the women and the kids and the others that are watching it, about what this is about. What are these men saying? What is it? Because they thought it was just part of football. all.
Oh.
So then we went to that next stage of, well, we need to make sure people understand what this is all about. So that was the next level,
That's right.
if you like. Yeah.
And it really demonstrates that solidarity, doesn't it, coming together.
Yeah.
It's very symbolic, as you said.
Yeah. I was in North Carolina a couple of years ago, and I did a talk, and I said I told them the story about it. It was mainly African American men and the women they call women of colour. There were so many of them in a room, and so I did a talk. And at the end of the conference, it was a 2-day conference, they all linked arms together. And I thought, this statement has moved to the other side of the world, you know. And I felt proud for those old Walbury men who said it for the first time, you know. I said, look, there's people linking up on the other side of the world. And then I heard in New Zealand, men had done that as well, you know. And I thought, wow, that's good for those men, you know, for their message to get out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
So in our country, can you talk about the government's responses? Perhaps then, when you first came to having those conversations in community, to the responses now from the government?
That's a good question, thank you for it. But, you know, from 2006, for many, many years, we did so much work voluntarily trying to raise the attention of this issue in the faces of government, and they just didn't hear it. You know, they didn't see it. I mean, it got swept under the carpet. It was the unacceptable behaviour being seen as acceptable, as I said before, and that was a bother for us. And I remember, and I'd been reading Winston Churchill, and I heard his great statement once, and I copied it. I said, never have so many done so much with so little, because that's what we did. I mean, we got to so many people, we did so much work with nothing. And then the opportunity came for me to actually look in the eyes of the Prime Minister at a COAG meeting when he was sitting there, and I said, Prime Minister, what do you want me to do when the cries come from the remote parts of the Northern Territory, 1,000 kilometres away from where I am, and the men ring me up and say, come and help us stop the family violence? What do you want me to say to them? Because I can't get there, you know. And I could see the hurt in his face, you know, and he took the opportunity later on to call me outside to have a chat with him, and then some funding started to flow. So, and of course there were some other issues that were happening around Australia as well. But I think gradually, you know, the penny started to drop, and government started to say, hey, we're going to do lots here. You know, the Victorian government, I mean, they do a power of work. So does Queensland. I mean, the work that happens in Queensland. I think, you know, those two states are in front of everyone else in Australia. Certainly in the territory where we're lagging behind, but our reach out to those remote communities is much more difficult, much further. And then you get the thing like the wet season where you can't, you know, all those other things.
Yeah.
So the levels are still high out there. But so I come here for this conference, you know, to listen and learn, you know, and not to tell people that we have the answer, because we don't. We just happen to do some work in that space that we think is okay and may be useful for other communities to try, and maybe not. But I want to learn a lot, and I know there's some great people here. There's yarning circles are great, and I just think it's great that you have this. And I can't believe there's 40 of them, because if I'd have known from day one this would have been my 40th. It's a great conference.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a conference that, while we talked about the Queensland Centre hosting it, that's simply all we do. Is it is, you know, Jamie, you're on the working group this year. You know, it's with and for Indigenous services and people to learn from one another, to network. And we have the privilege with our lovely event manager who's doing the filming of, I suppose the word would be, hosting it. But there is power, is there not, Jamie, as well, do you think, in the people coming together? And we all learn from each other, and certainly we learn from everyone. Linking up and no more. Yeah.
That's right.
Can I just say two things that have struck me in recent times that bother me? One is the number of women who are now finding themselves in prison for retaliating to family violence, and these are women who would have grown up as young girls witnessing violence with their parents and seeing that mum couldn't defend herself. And then they said, if it happens to me, I will defend myself. And I remember speaking to the superintendent of the Alice Springs prison, and he said, 2 years ago, he said, we have 6 women in prison in Alice Springs. He said, now we have 60. 60 women, and the majority of them there for retaliating to family violence, and they're violent as well. So do we want is that what we want to happen to our country, that the men stay violent, the women get violent, and it doesn't stop? I don't think so. I mean, you say to people, and I say in those communities, would you rather have peace and harmony or chaos and madness? What would you prefer? And of course they want peace and harmony. They want their children to grow up in a calm family.
Yeah.
That's right.
And Jamie and Charlie, it's interesting you say that, Charlie, because I've just come from the Women's Centre in Townsville where we're doing a bit of a study, but speaking to one of their senior counsellors who said she goes in the Townsville prison each week, the women's prison, and she said exactly what you've just said, that the numbers of women who are in prison because they've retaliated is, in her mind, quite horrifying. And so she also is saying exactly the same thing. She was just saying the work they do, that they put this one day a week, but it is a sad reflection, isn't it?
So, Charlie, with the women that you've talked about in protecting themselves against the violence that is perpetrated upon them, historically, we lived very harmonious lives, and we had a very sophisticated system of kinship and law, LORE. So nowadays, a woman has to protect herself, whereas perhaps back historically that may not have been the case. But I guess it comes back to the supports and the services. So can you talk about what supports are for women these days and services?
In the prison system or outside the prison system?
In the prison system.
Yeah, certainly. It's certainly in the prison system. There's quite a lot of services that are going in there. And you know what? What the rallying call, I think, from other women from outside the prison, non-Indigenous women as well, who know exactly what these women are going through, so they come forward. So there's non-Indigenous services being provided inside that prison for those women as well. The other thing I found really interesting with the women said, what sort of programs can we develop, to help you deal with this? And they said, you know what, if we could learn to play football and control our emotions and our behaviours out on the football field, we might be better at doing it in the home situation, which was something I would never have even thought of. So that's what we started to do. We started to teach the women in prison how to play football, or sport. But playing football, there's rules there right in front of you, because if you do the wrong thing, they get you straight away. So you have to control yourself. So they were saying from that they learn to control their anger and their emotions, because you can't do it out on the football field. And I must say, they're not bad footballers.
Pretty skillful.
They're quite good. Because I think they've grown up with the game there in front of them, so you don't have to teach them how to kick the ball. They know how to kick it already. They've seen it, so they know how to.
Well, this leads to the next question in the workers who work with the women and go into the community. So what's your advice for an emerging social worker who is entering a community? What's the valuable advice?
Jamie, here's the first thing, and I firmly believe this: unless you care deeply about reducing family violence, unless you have it in your heart, unless you have a will to do something about it, don't do this work. This work is very, very difficult. Even if you're a social worker, but you don't think that this is the most important thing, don't do it. Only do this work if you believe that it's the one thing you will do 24 hours of the day, 7 days a week, because so many times we employ people, they just can't do the work. They won't go the extra mile, if I can use the old language. So you've got to have a will to do it, You've got to really want to make a difference and leave no stone unturned. I think that's really important. The next thing is you must listen. You must build a relationship with those communities. You can't just turn up one day and come up with a whole lot of ideas. It might take you weeks to build a relationship out there, to get trusted and heard. And this is not new, you know. It frustrates me to talk about it because we talked about this in 1980, you know. We've got to communicate better. We've got to have a better relationship with people, Aboriginal people. And still we talk about it here in 2018, you know. So I think we've got to drive that message home. But I think it's got to come from the communities themselves to say to people, we want to work with you, but we want to trust you. Give us reason to trust you. You know, I think that's a fair ask from communities because you invade their space and wherever it is that you're working with them, you invade their space, and if you invade their space, then you need to know, you know, that they want to know how committed you are.
That's right.
So they're just two things I think are really important. There's lots of other things, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything you want to ask of us, Charlie?
Yeah, maybe, because...
We may not have the answers.
No. I know. I think so the No More campaign recognises that 8 million Australians play sport every weekend. 8 million people play sport. So we think we think every sporting club in Australia, no matter where they are, will only get their funding and only get a licence if they write a domestic violence action plan, if they write a plan that says this is what we stand for, and that the sponsors who sponsor them say, we will not sponsor you unless you show us your domestic violence action plan.
Wow.
So I think we just have to be really strong about that. So I want to ask you both, because you work in this field, what do you think of that? Well, I mean, it's the heavy-handed approach, but if we just keep leaving it, it just might not happen.
Charlie, do any do that now? Do any of the codes or any... But it's not across the board.
No, what we need is nationally that message.
national.
We need the AFL, the NRL, like the top of it all, to actually bring that in. I know in the Northern Territory that the AFLNT, which is the Northern Territory body that oversees football, are bringing it in this year.
Yeah.
It's very clearly written in the licensing agreement of the team. You want to play, you show us your plan, or show us what you're doing, so that we can see your plan. Because you know what's happened? Great numbers of women have invaded sport in Australia like never before. They have rushed forward like we've never seen before. Now there's a duty of care and responsibility on the codes to protect those women and make sure they're coming into a safe environment.
That's right.
We don't want them to come there where it's not safe. So there's some responsibility there, and I reckon that's the impetus for the codes and that, to say we're going to draw a line in the sand here. And next year, this is what comes into play. Some clubs have started to do it, which is good, but some won't. But they will if they don't have a choice.
If they don't have a choice.
And it would seem a great idea to me, Jamie. Do you think, because it's got to come cascade down, does it top down, is what you're saying, Charlie, and you need things in place that are clear, unequivocal, that this won't be tolerated, and if from the sponsors to the boards and whoever governs sport have that action plan, that policy, then, you know, filtering down from coaches, assistant coach, or everyone that works with the players, one would think it would be then carried through. And then it's actually saying, well, no more and zero tolerance, isn't it?
Yeah. So we'd be saying, well, why should we have to put up with the violence that's happening to women? Why should we as a nation, as a country, why should we sit back and allow that? Like, I want to see some public outrage. Do you know? I want Australia to rise up and say, no more. We're just going to stop this in its tracks, because this is preventable. But it's not. There's no. And I know people can say, well, you know, some cases you've got to work your way through the care. So be it. You work through it carefully, but don't do nothing. Don't do nothing.
And I think some of the football players that are speaking out, so Gordon Tallis, I think, and some others, it's very powerful, isn't it? Because they're role models to older and younger, you know, players. And I think that makes an enormous difference, don't you? You know,
Fancy recognising people like Gordon Tallis for the work that he does stopping family violence
Yes.
rather than the work that he has done out
Yes.
on the field.
Yes.
He's the real hero,
Yes.
the man who did all of that on the field,
Yes.
and now he's doing all of this off the field.
Yes.
That's the heroes we
Yes,
want, don't we?
agreed.
That's it.
So,
It is.
so many of them. The other thing that bothers me, I think, is the language in sport. I think we have to challenge the language that gets used in sport. And I'm a commentator myself, and I've been doing that for 25 years, and I hear myself having said it in the past. I'm not going to say that anymore. I'm not going to say they were thrashed, they were bashed, they were belted, they were whipped,
Yes.
they were hammered. I'm not going to say those words, because what do little people hear when they hear that? Because they don't see it in sporting terms.
No.
They think belted is something completely different.
Ah, yes,
So why should we use that language? We don't have to.
No.
Yeah.
The wiser, younger commentators coming through won't use that language.
Okay.
That's my hope. They'll find other ways of giving us the result rather than saying they were smashed. And I've sat in the crowd and listened to the crowd calling out to the sport to smash him,
Yes.
bash him,
Yeah.
like so stomp on him. So what are we? What is this?
Yes.
What is going on here?
Yeah.
We've got to stop all of that, I think.
And language is very powerful.
Yes.
Mm.
So it really defines the behaviour
Yeah.
that we use or
Yeah.
misuse.
Yeah.
We're talking about reducing domestic and family violence and addressing that, because right now a woman is dying a week
Yeah.
Yes,
more than
yeah,
a woman. Yeah.
I think, there's often the saying that when people cross that white line and go out to play, that's a different person. Because they change, they're a different person, because out here there's war, going on out on the field. But where the problem for me is, the language that comes from outside here to these guys here connects them. Do you know what I mean? It's not like you can slice that little bit out of the field and say, well, that's just a game, so therefore it's okay. It's not okay, because these people outside here are yelling out, smash them, bash them, crush them, whip them, hammer, all those sorts of things. That should be abusive language. I think that should be abusive language, because that's what
And
it
it would
is.
be in other settings, wouldn't it,
Yeah.
outside the sports arena. Actually, that's been really very insightful for me, Charlie, talking about sport. And in a past life, when I was part of a funding body, we were asked about the use of government funds being used to sponsor shirts in the Cherbourg community for the rugby team. And I said, there were champions in the way you're talking about, Charlie. And they gave the rationale, and I said yes. I thought, and then I had to do a number of briefs justifying that decision, because it was a little outside but the community was behind it. I had the elders and the services saying, this is what we want, this is what we need, we'll follow through. So if that doesn't make a difference, who am I to say, well, no, because it might be, it wasn't, yes, it was sitting on the, that line of outside the scope, but it did make a difference. And they sent photos of the team and so if there had been an incident, that player didn't get to train or play, and that was worse than, so there was everyone actively saying, you do the right thing and we can make a great team. So that was some time ago, and it was a tiny thing. It wasn't me that did all the organising, but I do remember thinking that was so little money to make what ended up being a difference.
Yeah.
And it wasn't hard to say yes, because it kind of made sense in the way you said. The other thing that I learnt, and you've reinforced, is the power of things like sport, your everyday sport, but what a difference it can make. Now you're talking about women in jail, with the sporting teams and what that can do. So are there things I hadn't thought about before, so thank you for sharing.
So can I do one other thing we've found out here, working with these men do not like to fail in the eyes of other men.
No.
Men cannot deal with that. If they fail in front of their family or their community, they can cope with it.
They can
but they do not want to be seen as a failure by other men.
No.
And so there's an area there that we can do some work in, I think.
Yes.
We can look at that area.
Yeah.
And the point you made about the champions, that I love that whole idea, because we haven't gone to that then, because we don't have the money to get to have these champions. But we did find one thing, that those smaller communities have champions of their own.
Exactly.
They have their own role models.
Yeah.
So if we try to drag someone in from outside and say this is the champion,
Exactly.
they're saying, well, we have our own,
Yeah.
Billy Smith is out, he's done great things for us, whatever. But that's not to say we shouldn't get the big names too, and the big names join up with the smaller name person to have double champions. You know what I mean? Like, that's all possible. Everything's possible. So we learn all this from this conference.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Charlie King, for your time.